Chapter 13. The warm sunlight bathed the Emerald Palace's garden, creating a tranquil atmosphere as Lucas and Athanasia lounged on a blanket, their picnic a welcome escape from the demands of palace life. Lucas lay back with a relaxed sigh, breathing in the scent of hyacinth and tulips that filled the air, stretching lazily in the soft grass. His eyes fluttered closed in contentment. Athanasia, sitting beside him, was enjoying a slice of cake and a cup of tea, the peaceful moment making her smile. She looked carefree, her usual tensions melting away as she savored the simple pleasure of the moment. Felix and Lillian stood off to the side, their eyes occasionally darting toward the pair, quietly wondering what Athanasia had asked Lucas to do. "I'm curious," Lillian murmured to Felix, lowering her voice. "What exactly did the princess say to him to get him to take a break like this?" Felix shrugged, his eyes not leaving Lucas and Athanasia. "I don't know, but it's not like him to sit still for long. She must have pulled some kind of trick." Just as the servants exchanged their thoughts, a familiar figure wandered into the garden. Jeanette, with her usual air of curiosity and mischief, spotted the two and decided to approach them. Her eyes brightened at the sight of Athanasia and Lucas together, and she couldn't resist walking over. "Hello, sister. Are you taking a break?" Jeanette asked, her voice light and teasing. Athanasia opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Lucas's sharp voice cut through the air. "Are you blind or just plain stupid?" he snapped, his tone dripping with disdain. Felix and Lillian froze, their eyes wide, and even Athanasia tensed at the sudden confrontation. The servants stood still, unsure of how to react as the tension thickened in the garden. Before Athanasia could say anything to defuse the situation, Lucas leaned forward, his eyes cold. "Why are you so annoying?" Lucas said, the words sharp and biting as he glared at Jeanette. "First off, you think you're so special because you're the emperor's daughter, but you're nothing more than a brat with a chip on your shoulder. You always show up at the worst times, like you have some right to be here, and you never take the hint that no one wants you around." Jeanette's smile faltered, her face flushing with embarrassment as Lucas's words cut through her. And then, Lucas continued, ticking off his complaints with a sneer, "You act like a child, always talking about trivial nonsense, asking the same stupid questions like you're trying to prove something. Like, seriously, do you even have a mind of your own?" Jeanette's eyes began to well up with tears as she looked toward Athanasia for support, her lower lip trembling. But Lucas wasn't done. "Not to mention," Lucas said with a sarcastic chuckle, "your voice. It's like nails on a chalkboard every time you speak. Have you ever considered shutting up for a second?" Jeanette turned desperately toward Athanasia, but Lucas gave her a cold, challenging look. "Go ahead. Tell me to stop. I dare you." Athanasia, feeling the weight of the situation, turned her gaze downward, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She couldn't bring herself to speak up, and the servants exchanged worried glances. Felix and Lillian looked to her, silently asking why she wasn't stepping in. But even Athanasia remained silent, her gaze fixed firmly on the ground. The tension in the air was palpable, and Jeanette, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, clutched her hands in front of her as she struggled to hold herself together. Just as the situation seemed to reach its breaking point, a voice rang out, cutting through the silence. "What's going on here?" Ezekiel's voice was calm but firm as he stepped into the garden, his gaze sharp and assessing. His usual relaxed demeanor was replaced with a rare seriousness, and he walked toward the group with purpose. He said, his eyes narrowing at Lucas. "That's enough." Lucas glanced up at Ezekiel, his smirk slowly fading as he realized the situation was no longer going unnoticed. Without saying another word, Ezekiel moved toward Jeanette, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "Come on, Jeanette," he said softly. "Let's get you away from here." Jeanette, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, nodded silently and allowed Ezekiel to lead her away, the weight of the harsh words still heavy on her heart. As they walked off, the servants stood in stunned silence, still processing what had just transpired. Lucas, for his part, leaned back on the blanket once more, clearly uninterested in what had just happened. But Athanasia, still staring at the ground, felt a mixture of relief and guilt settle in her chest. The scene had ended, but the tension lingered in the air. In the Sapphire Palace, Jeanette wept quietly in Ezekiel's arms, her sobs shaking her slender frame. The walls of her room, adorned with fine tapestries and delicate ornaments, seemed to close in on her as she let out the frustration and hurt from the encounter. Her tears were endless, her heart aching from the cruel words Lucas had thrown at her. Her mind couldn't stop replaying the scene in the garden, each insult echoing in her ears. Ezekiel held her gently, his strong arms offering a comforting embrace as he whispered soft reassurances. "It's okay, Jeanette," he murmured, brushing her hair away from her face. "Lucas can be harsh, but you don't have to listen to him. You're not what he says." But despite his words, Jeanette's tears wouldn't stop. Her fragile heart had been bruised, and though she was used to the harshness of palace life, this time it felt different. This time, it was personal. Just as she started to calm, there was a knock at the door. Jeanette wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself before speaking. "Come in," she said softly. The door creaked open, and in walked Countess Rosalia, her posture regal and her expression stern. She took one look at Jeanette's red eyes and knew immediately what had happened. The Countess was a woman known for her sharp mind and unyielding sense of loyalty to her family, and seeing her niece in such a state stirred something inside her. "What happened?" Rosalia demanded, her voice icy but controlled. Jeanette hesitated, her gaze flickering toward Ezekiel, before she looked away, ashamed. It's nothing, Aunt Rosalia. It's just." Before she could finish, Rosalia cut her off, her sharp gaze turning toward Ezekiel. "Did you see this? Did that brat Lucas do this?" Ezekiel hesitated before nodding solemnly. "He went too far this time, Aunt Rosalia. He insulted her without reason." Rosalia's lips twisted into a frown, her eyes narrowing with a cold fire. "That boy's been getting away with too much for too long." Her gaze turned back to Jeanette, and her expression softened, though her anger still simmered beneath the surface. "You don't have to put up with that, Jeanette. Not from anyone. Not even him." Jeanette sniffled, glancing at her aunt through tear-filled eyes. I don't know what to do, Aunt Rosalia." "Athanasia." "Athanasia did nothing, I know," Rosalia interrupted bitterly, her hands clenched tightly at her sides. "I saw the scene in the garden. She stood there, silent, like a coward, while Lucas verbally tore you apart." Her tone became more venomous with each word. "I won't let this slide. No one bullies my niece and gets away with it. And certainly not when someone so cowardly as Athanasia is supposed to protect you." Jeanette's gaze dropped, feeling the sting of her aunt's words. She wanted to defend Athanasia, to explain that her half-sister had been caught off guard, but the truth was, she couldn't find the words. Athanasia had stood by, not helping, not speaking up, and that hurt. Rosalia paced around the room, her mind already working on a plan. "The nobles will hear of this," she muttered, her voice laced with a determined coldness. "If Athanasia won't defend you, I'll make sure they all know the truth." She turned back to face Jeanette, her eyes gleaming with intent. "The rumors will spread. And they'll spread fast." Days passed, and the gossip slowly began to churn through the halls of the palace. Countess Rosalia had set her plan into motion, ensuring that the right people overheard her words. By the time the next court gathering arrived, the whispers had already taken root. "Did you hear?" one noblewoman whispered to her companion in the palace courtyard. "It seems Princess Athanasia is not as perfect as she appears." Apparently, she ignored her half-sister's suffering, letting magician bully her mercilessly. And then she did nothing when Jeanette cried. The woman's voice was laced with disbelief, her tone scandalized. "I always thought Athanasia was different, but it seems she's just as bad as the rest of them." Another noble, overhearing the conversation, nodded gravely. "It's terrible. I heard from Lady Rosalia herself that Athanasia could have stopped it, but she didn't. In fact, she probably didn't care. Why else would she let her half-sister suffer like that?" Soon, the rumors spread like wildfire. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, their voices filled with judgment and disdain. The nobles of the court had always held Athanasia in high regard, enamored with her poised demeanor and perfect reputation. But now, cracks began to form in that image. The rumors cast doubt on her character. Had the beloved princess truly stood by and let her sister suffer? Had she been complicit in the bullying of Jeanette? At a dinner gathering that evening, Lady Berenice, one of the more influential figures in the court, shook her head as she sipped her wine. It's shameful. The princess should be setting an example, protecting her sister, not allowing such cruelty to take place under her watch. Her companion, Lord Calwyn, frowned deeply. I don't know what to believe anymore. Athanasia was always so composed. But now, this? It makes you question everything. The rumors took on a life of their own. People began questioning Athanasia's integrity and motives, sowing seeds of doubt in the hearts of those who had once admired her. The once perfect princess was now under scrutiny, her silence now seen as a betrayal of family loyalty. In the Sapphire Palace, Countess Rosalia smirked, watching the seeds of her carefully crafted plot take root. This was only the beginning. If Athanasia wouldn't stand up for Jeanette, then Rosalia would make sure everyone knew that her niece had been wronged. The court would hear her side of the story. And once the rumors spread far enough, there would be no escaping the truth. The countess had no idea of the storm she had unleashed. The rumors about Athanasia had reached Lucas's ears, and once he found out about the accusations, he lost all composure. His fury exploded in an instant, causing havoc throughout the Sapphire Palace. Furniture was torn from its place, thrown violently across rooms, spinning through the air, defying gravity. Tables, chairs, and vases were flung to the walls and ceiling as if they were mere toys in the hands of a child. The very structure of the palace seemed to groan under the strain, as every room was turned upside down. Lucas's anger turned the once peaceful quarters of Countess Rosalia into a chaotic, unrecognizable mess. Servants scrambled for safety, rushing from room to lock doors and close windows, but even those efforts were in vain. Every spare bedroom in the palace was sealed shut, every window tightly locked to contain the storm that was Lucas. Margaret, the head maid, ran from corridor to corridor, her face pale with terror. She had seen Lucas's wrath before, but never on such a scale. She knew they were running out of time. Everyone get outside! Margaret cried, her voice sharp with fear as she urged the servants to flee the palace. Quick, gather yourselves. Move. She pushed people out of rooms, helping them into the safety of the open air. The hallways were filled with panic as servants ran in all directions, hoping to escape the fury within the palace. Jeanette, wide-eyed with fear, dashed through the halls as the walls seemed to shake with each violent act Lucas took. The air was thick with tension, and every servant's breath caught in their throat. They could see the damage from the open corridors, walls cracked, furniture floating in midair, and curtains torn from their rods. The servants and Jeanette finally burst through the front doors of the palace, pouring out into the courtyard, their faces stricken with fear. They ran as fast as they could, shouting to anyone who might hear them. The chaos inside was unbearable, and they could do nothing to stop it. Margaret, taking the lead, called out to the others, her voice hoarse from the strain. The Imperial Guard. We need the Imperial Guard now. She waved her arms desperately as the sound of Lucas's destruction echoed in the distance. It wasn't long before the heavy clop of hooves could be heard from a distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of clinking armor. The Imperial Guards, mounted on their mighty steeds, rode toward the Sapphire Palace with urgency. Their faces were grim, each member of the guard aware of the potential danger that awaited them. Within moments, the first of the Imperial Guards arrived at the gates of the palace. Their leader, General Benedict, dismounted swiftly, his expression a mask of authority. He surveyed the scene, the servants running from the building, the windows shattered, the sounds of chaos still echoing from inside. Secure the palace, General Benedict ordered, his voice cutting through the panic. We need to restrain him before more damage is done. The Imperial Guards moved into position, surrounding the palace with practiced precision. They drew their weapons, prepared for anything, and moved toward the doors. The chaos had reached its peak, and now it was in their hands to end it. As the gates of the Sapphire Palace closed behind the advancing guards, the scene was set for the Imperial forces to confront Lucas, and the destruction that had ravaged the palace was finally met with the authority to stop it. The chaos continued to swirl around the Sapphire Palace, the massive structure shaking as if it were a toy in the hands of a furious child. The walls groaned under the strain, cracks appearing along their once pristine surfaces, windows shattered like glass under a crushing weight. Furniture and decorations floated through the air, defying gravity as Lucas unleashed his destructive power in waves. The wizards from the tower had been called for aid, but their magic was no match for the force Lucas commanded. One by one, they retreated, unwilling to challenge the raw might of what they now realized was not a mere sorcerer, but an ancient being of terrifying power. The once elegant palace was now a crumbling mess, with the air thick with dust and debris. The Imperial Guard stood at the gates, helpless, their weapons drawn but unsure of how to approach the destruction that threatened to tear the entire palace apart. The sound of crashing stone and splintering wood echoed through the halls, a testament to the unstoppable wrath of Lucas, who seemed to feed on his fury. And then, as if the world itself was holding its breath, a new presence arrived. The Emperor, Claude, had stepped in, his regal figure cutting through the destruction as he gathered his own magic. His power was immense, but even he knew that his magic alone was insufficient to contain the dark force that Lucas had become. He could feel the ancient energy radiating from Lucas, a power beyond anything he had ever faced. His heart tightened with the realization Lucas was the dark wizard of the tower, the one whose name had been whispered in legends, feared by even the most powerful wizards. As Claude raised his hands, the air around him shimmered with energy, and a protective barrier began to form around the palace. But it wasn't enough. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the entire palace seemed to groan under the strain of Lucas's power. In the midst of the chaos, a sudden cry cut through the air. "Lucas! Stop! Why are you so angry?" The voice was calm, but filled with concern, and it pierced the madness like a beacon of light. Claude turned his head, his eyes falling on his daughter, Princess Athanasia, standing at the edge of the palace grounds. Her face was pale, her expression one of both fear and concern, as she stood beside Sir Felix, who was looking around nervously, clearly unsure of what to do in the face of such destruction. Lucas's eyes locked onto the princess, and for a moment, the chaos around him seemed to slow. His anger, which had been so all-consuming moments ago, faltered as he saw the fear in Athanasia's eyes. The sight of her, standing there with such vulnerability, grounded him in a way nothing else had. His chest heaved with the weight of his emotions, and for a brief second, he found himself questioning everything. As the winds calmed and the tremors of destruction ceased, Lucas's anger slowly began to dissipate. The force that had been unleashed started to fade, and the pieces of broken furniture and shattered stone floated gently back down to the ground. He stood there, frozen, his breathing heavy, struggling to regain control of the power he had almost lost. Claude, still wary, kept his eyes on Lucas, his magic still crackling in the air. But now, it was Athanasia who had captured the attention of the room. She had broken through the fury that had consumed Lucas, and her presence seemed to have grounded him in a way nothing else could. For the first time, the palace stood still, the only sound the faint echo of distant destruction, and the low hum of magic in the air. Like, comment and subscribe to be notified for updates in the series.